Well, I am so excited because I have this beautiful lady here who happened to be my pastor, her and her husband, while I was growing up in those formative years. And I'm so excited for her to share such an amazing story. Well, you have a lot of miracles.
I do.
And now you have an amazing journey that you're doing now. And so if you could just share a little bit about your miracle, that would be awesome.
Yeah, thank you, Kristen. It's great. I always love telling my story, and now I am 43 years post breast cancer survivor. So sometimes when I feel like I share it, it feels very like it was just yesterday. But then when I think about how many years God has allowed me to live with a diagnosis that honestly in my family, no one had ever survived cancer up until I did. And so I was 28 years old when I was diagnosed.
Really?
With my kids were 2, 4, and 7. And because my mother had already passed away and I had aunts pass away, and so I had a real root of fear that really gripped me, not really knowing would I see my children grow up and get married and be a grandmother. And here I am today. And I do believe God has been in the middle of my life and has had a plan.
That is so cool.
Yeah.
Was it one moment when your healing came, or was it gradual?
It's interesting because the healing came in physically when I had the surgery and I did, walk the process. But for me, I felt like my healing was physical and that I survived cancer. But the other side of it was my emotional and just, as I mentioned, the fears really had become a root in my life that I had to combat that. And God's word just began to be so real to me, and literally hearing God speak to me about life in his word to me.
That is wonderful. I think it's so important that you mentioned that you struggled with fear, because I think sometimes we know that our faith is honored, but we think, well, I messed up, I got fearful, or I was in that place where it was dark, but God honored your faith, not your fear. So you definitely had that real moment, right? Like you felt like those impossibilities, but you chose then to make a shift. What would you say is the advice you would give somebody who's either walking through that particular thing or something totally different?
Well, I believe that one of the things that God really helped me with is that he, first of all, let me believe for a future, but in that he also said, I've given you today. And I wanted to be able to look back at my life and feel like I didn't fear every single day, but that I lived joyfully and that I could take hold of God's blessings in my life every single day. And so I had a choice on whether or not I was going to just live in the fearfulness of was I going to live or was I going to die? And the fear thing, Joshua, in the book of Joshua, in the very first part of the book, the angel of the Lord tells Joshua 3 times not to fear, which meant that Joshua feared. He had an assignment that he had to go and take Israel into the land. And I'm sure all along he thought Moses was going to be the man. And I think it's owning what God gives us. James, the book of James, one of the scriptures that was a life verse for me was, count it all joy when you face trials of many kind, because the trying of your faith then produces that patience and that you will become mature. And that was my heart. I didn't want to be, James also talks about we're being tossed back and forth with every, wind of doctrine and so living in belief and unbelief was like living in that wave that just went back and forth, and I wanted to be anchored. And that's what his word did for me. And it was a day-to-day, sometimes minute-by-minute decision to say, I trust you, God, with my life.
Yeah, and I'm sure with those lies, did the doctors tell you, like, this is not looking good? Like, were those kinds of lies coming at you all the time?
Yeah, so first and foremost, it was my family. So just the history in itself was glaring. And then because of that, the doctors would say, I would read a report and say, well, because of family history. And I had 2 diagnoses. I had in June one breast, and then in November in the second breast. And I can remember when the second one came, I was like, what, God, here I'm trusting you. And so even with that, like I think sometimes in our faith we think we're gonna get there, and then we'll never have another thing that we have to trust again with. It's a life journey. Faith is always just putting it out there and saying, God, your word says that all my days are numbered in your book. So do I trust you with that? And so it ultimately just allowing his peace to come in. And I did make the choice of like people that I was around, like that. There were some people in that season where I knew that conversations with them were limited, because there would be the conversations of, well, what ifs, all the what ifs.
Right.
And so as I stood for my healing, I knew I needed to be surrounded by people that would also pray with me to that end.
That is so good.
Yeah.
Actually, the other young lady who spoke about her story, that's something that they have mentioned, both Donna and April, the previous miracle, that surrounding yourself with truth and God's word, and also with people that can come around you. I think that is so, they say you become the 5 people you hang around.
Yeah.
And that is so true. Because sometimes you think, well, I don't, that's good for other people, but you need that. You need support, and we all need connections. Okay, this is kind of a funny question.
Okay.
What would you say, if you have one word to describe your miracle, your journey, or phrase? You don't have to limit it to one word. I know.
Okay. If I could describe it, it's been, wow, I don't think I've ever had anybody ask me that question before. And I think part of it is because I'm 43 years, past it. So I would just say, my journey's been life-giving. I mean, the miracle is that God has been truthful to me. When one of the things that just hit me was how, I know this is more than one word, one sentence, but whenever I would have like a thought, if somebody would say something, or just even in my own mind, something would come up, I'd almost hear the Lord say, did I tell you that? Did I tell you that you were going to die? Did I tell you, this and this, or that, it goes from your breast to your liver? I had a nurse that one time told me that. And that is that whole thing of just taking those thoughts captive and then just giving them to Jesus and saying, God, your voice is the one that I want to hear. And so I would guess my journey, even more than the miracle of still being alive, is just that, God is true. He's true to his word, and the faith journey is exciting. I don't know that we all want a life that's just has no issues and no problems, but we'll never know God if we don't walk through things. That's where it all, that whole word of, where the rubber meets the road, that's the reality. When you literally have walked through something and God has shown himself to be real and present. I've told people before, and I guess probably maybe this is my sentence, is I would never have known God the way I know him without walking through what I walked through.
That's so powerful. That's awesome. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for
thank
sharing.
You.
Is there anything last words you have?
No, not really, other than I'm just grateful and thankful. And that's a good place to be.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Donna.
Thank
really
you,
appreciate
Kristen.
it. I'm sure that blessed you. It sure did bless me.